The walls are closing in on Meghan Markle, and this time there is absolutely nowhere left to hide. Multiple former palace staff members have reportedly shattered years of silence, and what they are revealing is nothing short of explosive. We are not talking about vague whispers or anonymous grumblings buried in tabloid pages. We are talking about coordinated, detailed accounts from the very people who worked alongside the Duchess of Sussex during her time inside the royal machine. Sources claim these former employees have come armed with documentation, with receipts, with evidence that could potentially unravel every carefully constructed narrative Meghan has spent years building. And according to insiders close to the situation, the Duchess is absolutely terrified. Reports suggest that Meghan was left visibly shaken when she learned the full scope of what these former staff members are preparing to reveal. One source described her reaction as nothing short of panic. Another claimed she immediately went into crisis mode, placing emergency calls to her legal team and public relations specialists on both sides of the Atlantic. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who has positioned herself as the victim of a cold, unfeeling institution is now allegedly scrambling to silence the very people who served her during her royal tenure. The irony is so thick you could choke on it. What makes this situation particularly devastating is the nature of the evidence these former employees reportedly possess. Sources claim that some staff members kept detailed notes during their time working with Meghan. We are talking about contemporaneous documentation, saved emails, text message threads, and according to some reports, even recordings that could corroborate their accounts. One legal expert who spoke anonymously to journalists described this potential evidence as devastating if it ever sees the light of day. These are not random accusations from bitter former colleagues. This is allegedly a coordinated effort by multiple professionals who felt compelled to document what they witnessed in real time. The timing of these revelations could not be worse for the Sussex brand. With their Netflix partnership under scrutiny, their Spotify deal already in the rearview mirror, and questions swirling about the viability of their Archewell Foundation, Meghan can ill afford another public relations disaster of this magnitude. Yet here we are watching what appears to be a perfect storm forming on the horizon. The staff members who once answered to her, who once facilitated her every request, who once signed those infamous non-disclosure agreements that Meghan herself reportedly refused to sign, are now allegedly ready to tell their truth. And folks, if even half of what insiders are claiming proves accurate, the Sussex narrative may never recover. But these bombshell accusations are just the tip of an enormous iceberg, and the specific individuals now breaking their silence have credentials that make their testimony impossible to dismiss. These are not disgruntled outsiders with axes to grind or tabloid fabricators looking for a quick payday. The former staff members reportedly coming forward are seasoned palace professionals, individuals who dedicated their careers to serving the royal family with discretion and excellence. Sources indicate that at least 4 former aides have allegedly coordinated their accounts, creating what one insider described as a united front of testimony that presents a remarkably consistent picture of life working for the Duchess of Sussex. These are people who understood the privilege and responsibility of their positions, people who took oaths of service seriously, people who do not break their silence lightly. According to reports, the group includes at least one personal assistant who worked directly with Meghan on daily scheduling and correspondence. Another is allegedly a former palace liaison who coordinated between the Sussex household and other senior royal residences. A third is reportedly a scheduling coordinator who managed the complex logistics of official engagements and private events. And perhaps most significantly, sources claim that a member of the communications team who handled press relations for the couple is also among those ready to speak. These are individuals who saw everything. They managed the calendar. They read the emails. They witnessed the private moments that never made it into official statements or glossy magazine profiles. One source close to the former employees described their collective mental state after leaving the Sussex household as traumatized and silenced. Another insider claimed these individuals felt they had no choice but to remain quiet for years, bound by professional expectations and fears of legal retaliation. But something has shifted. Reports suggest that recent events, perhaps the continued accusations leveled against the royal family, perhaps the publication of certain memoirs that portrayed palace staff in unflattering terms, have convinced these former employees that the time for silence has ended. Allow me to translate what this really means. These people watched Meghan craft a public narrative that allegedly contradicted their lived experiences, and they have finally had enough. What makes their coordination particularly significant is the legal preparation that has allegedly accompanied their decision to speak. Sources claim that several of these former staff members have been in contact with journalists, yes, but also with legal representatives who are helping them navigate the complex waters of breaking perceived confidentiality while protecting themselves from potential retaliation. One report suggests that at least 2 of the individuals have consulted with attorneys specializing in employment law and defamation cases. This is not impulsive revenge. This is calculated, methodical, and designed to withstand whatever legal countermeasures measures the Sussex team might attempt to deploy. The palace itself is reportedly watching this development with considerable interest. Insiders say that senior royal aides have been aware for some time that former Sussex household staff harbored serious concerns about their experiences. The infamous bullying investigation, commissioned by the palace but never publicly released, allegedly contains testimony from some of these very individuals. For years, that report has remained locked away, its contents known only to a handful of senior officials. But with former staff now willing to speak directly to the press, the pressure to unseal that investigation is mounting rapidly. One royal source put it bluntly: the truth has a way of finding sunlight eventually. But the identity of these accusers pales in comparison to the specific incidents they are allegedly prepared to describe, and what they claim happened behind closed palace doors is genuinely shocking. Insiders claim that Meghan's behavior behind closed doors was completely unrecognizable from the warm, compassionate public persona she so carefully cultivated. The disconnect between the woman who hugged schoolchildren for cameras and the woman who allegedly terrorized her staff in private is, according to sources, absolutely staggering. One former employee reportedly described the experience of working for the Duchess as psychological warfare. Another allegedly compared the household atmosphere to walking on eggshells that had been scattered across a minefield. These are not gentle criticisms from sensitive employees who could not handle a demanding boss. These are descriptions of an allegedly toxic work environment that left multiple people requiring professional counseling. The allegations center around several consistent patterns of behavior. First and foremost are the reported late-night and early morning demands that became legendary among palace staff. Sources claim that emails firing at 5 in the morning were not occasional occurrences, but routine expectations. These messages allegedly contained detailed lists of tasks, complaints about previous work, and implied threats about job security. One insider described receiving 17 emails between midnight and sunrise regarding a single event, each one more demanding than the last. For those unfamiliar with how royal households typically operate, let me be clear: this kind of constant, aggressive communication is not normal. Senior members of the royal family are generally known for respecting staff boundaries and working hours. What Meghan allegedly demanded was, according to sources, unprecedented in modern palace memory. Beyond the communication style, former employees are reportedly prepared to describe verbal confrontations that crossed every professional line imaginable. One incident allegedly occurred during preparations for a major public engagement when a scheduling error resulted in a conflict. Sources claim Meghan's reaction was so severe that the staff member involved fled the room in tears and subsequently took medical leave. Another reported confrontation allegedly happened during a fitting when something about the clothing failed to meet expectations. The language allegedly used by the Duchess during this exchange is, according to insiders, unprintable. Let me be brutally honest here. We are not talking about a boss who occasionally lost her temper under pressure. We are talking about a pattern of alleged verbal aggression that sources describe as systematic and intentional. The infamous bullying investigation commissioned by the palace has become a central focus of these renewed allegations. That report, compiled after multiple formal complaints from Sussex household staff, has never been released to the public. Palace officials have consistently declined to comment on its contents or conclusions, but former employees are now allegedly pushing for its unsealing, arguing that the public deserves to know what their testimony revealed. One source close to the investigation described the report as damning in ways that would fundamentally alter public perception. Another suggested that the decision to bury the findings was itself a form of institutional protection, not for Meghan, but for the monarchy's desire to avoid further scandal during an already turbulent period. Perhaps most disturbingly, multiple former staff members reportedly required professional mental health support after their tenure in the Sussex household. Sources claim that at least 3 individuals sought counseling specifically related to workplace trauma they experienced while serving the Duchess. One reportedly continues to receive treatment to this day, years after leaving the position. The psychological toll described by these former employees allegedly extends beyond normal workplace stress. We are talking about people who entered prestigious palace positions with excitement and left questioning their own worth and capabilities. That kind of damage does not happen accidentally. It does not result from a slightly demanding work environment. It allegedly results from sustained exposure to treatment that no employee should ever endure. But among all these disturbing allegations, one particular claim stands above the rest, and sources say it involves documented proof that could change everything. Former palace staff reportedly did not just keep memories of their experiences working with Meghan Markle, they kept receipts, and in the world of public relations warfare, receipts are everything. Sources claim that multiple former employees had the foresight, or perhaps the self-preservation instinct, to document concerning incidents as they occurred. We are talking about saved emails that allegedly demonstrate patterns of aggressive communication. We are talking about text message threads that reportedly show demands made at all hours of the night. night. We are talking about contemporaneous notes written immediately after confrontations, while details were still fresh. One insider described the documentation as comprehensive enough to build a legal case 10 times over. Let that sink in for a moment. These former employees were allegedly keeping records because they knew even then that someday they might need to prove what they experienced. The most explosive category of alleged evidence involves what sources describe as contemporaneous photographs. Reports suggest that at least one former staff member photographed items or situations that they found concerning during their time in the Sussex household. The specific nature of these photographs remains unclear, but insiders hint that they could corroborate claims of excessive demands or unreasonable expectations. Another form of documentation allegedly exists in the form of calendar records showing the volume and timing of requests made by the Duchess. If accurate, these records would provide concrete proof of the early morning email barrages that multiple sources have described. Numbers do not lie, and apparently neither do timestamps. Legal experts who have been consulted about the potential impact of this documentation are reportedly stunned by its scope. One attorney specializing in employment disputes described the alleged evidence as the kind of material that settles cases before they ever reach a courtroom. Another suggested that if the documentation proves as comprehensive as sources indicate, Meghan's options for legal retaliation become extremely limited. You cannot successfully sue for defamation when the defendant has contemporary evidence supporting their claims. You cannot argue that allegations are fabricated when emails with your name on them allegedly confirm the very behavior being described. For someone who has built her post-royal brand on being the victim of a cruel institution, the existence of this documentation represents an existential threat. The palace's own internal records could also prove significant in corroborating staff accounts. Sources indicate that formal complaints filed during Meghan's tenure as a working royal were documented through official channels. Human resources records, incident reports, and the mysterious bullying investigation all allegedly contain testimony that aligns with what former staff are now prepared to say publicly. One royal insider noted that the palace has historically protected these records fiercely, viewing them as internal matters not subject to public scrutiny. But with former employees now willing to speak on the record, the pressure to release or confirm this documentation is intensifying daily. The carefully maintained wall between palace business and public knowledge may be developing serious cracks. What makes this evidence particularly dangerous for Meghan is its alleged contemporaneous nature. These are not memories that have been reconstructed years after the fact, subject to the natural distortions of time and emotion. These are documents allegedly created in real time when the incidents they describe were fresh and immediate. Defense attorneys know that contemporaneous evidence is among the most powerful forms of corroboration available. It suggests that the person creating the documentation believed, at the time it happened, that what they were experiencing was significant enough to record. That kind of evidence does not just support allegations, it transforms them from claims into something approaching established fact. But the existence of this documentation has allegedly triggered a response from Meghan that reveals just how seriously she is taking this threat, and sources say her reaction has been anything but calm. Insiders claim that Meghan Markle went white as a sheet when she first learned the full extent of what former staff members are preparing to reveal. The confident, media-savvy Duchess, who has successfully managed her public image for years, is now allegedly operating in full panic mode. Emergency calls to lawyers on both sides of the Atlantic reportedly began within hours of learning about the coordinated staff accounts. Public relations specialists who had not heard from the Sussex team in months suddenly found themselves fielding frantic inquiries about damage control strategies. One source close to the couple described the atmosphere inside their Montecito mansion as absolute chaos. Another suggested that Meghan has not slept properly since the revelations began circulating among media outlets. The legal response being assembled by Meghan's team is reportedly aggressive and multifaceted. Sources claim that attorneys have been instructed to explore every possible avenue for preventing former staff from speaking publicly. Cease and desist letters are allegedly being drafted. Potential defamation claims are being researched. The legal machinery that Meghan has successfully deployed in the past against tabloid publications is now reportedly being aimed at individuals who once worked for her. One legal expert observed that threatening lawsuits against former employees is a high-risk strategy that often backfires spectacularly in the court of public opinion. But apparently Meghan's team has concluded that the alternative, allowing these allegations to spread unchallenged, represents an even greater risk. The public relations strategy reportedly being developed alongside the legal response involves a familiar playbook. Sources indicate that Meghan's team is preparing to characterize the former staff members as participants in a coordinated smear campaign, likely organized by hostile forces within the British establishment. The narrative framework allegedly being constructed positions Meghan once again as the victim, this time of vengeful employees who have been manipulated by her enemies. Allow me to translate what this really means. Rather than addressing the substance of the allegations, the plan appears to involve attacking the credibility and motivations of the accusers. It is a strategy that has worked before, but this time the accusers allegedly have documentation that could undermine such attacks. One particularly ironic element of this crisis involves involves the non-disclosure agreements that Meghan herself reportedly refused to sign. When the Sussexes departed their royal duties, Meghan allegedly declined to participate in the standard NDA process that typically accompanies senior royal departures. At the time, this was framed as a principled stand against the silencing tactics of the institution. But sources now suggest that Meghan desperately wishes she had required her own staff to sign comprehensive confidentiality agreements. The people who are allegedly preparing to expose her behavior were not bound by the same restrictions she rejected for herself. The irony is absolutely staggering. She refused to be silenced, and now she cannot silence others. The timeline of this crisis response reveals just how seriously Meghan is taking the threat. Within 72 hours of learning about the coordinated staff accounts, sources claim she had assembled a team of 7 legal and public relations professionals working around the clock on strategy development. Meetings are allegedly occurring daily. Message discipline is being reinforced. Every public statement, every social media post, every interview request is reportedly being scrutinized through the lens of this developing situation. For a woman who built her brand on speaking her truth against powerful institutions, the current situation presents a painful contradiction. She may now be forced to stay silent while others speak theirs. But Meghan is not the only member of the household grappling with these revelations, and sources say Harry's response has created an entirely new source of tension within their marriage. Insiders claim that Prince Harry finds himself in an impossible position, torn between his loyalty to his wife and uncomfortable questions about what he may have witnessed during their time as working royals. Sources suggest that Harry has allegedly reached out privately to some of the former staff members who are preparing to speak, a move that reportedly infuriated Meghan when she learned of it. One insider described tense conversations between the couple about how to handle the situation, with Harry allegedly pushing for a more conciliatory approach while Meghan favors aggressive legal action. The fault lines in their marriage, normally hidden behind carefully coordinated public appearances, are allegedly becoming more visible as this crisis intensifies. The question of Harry's knowledge has become central to the unfolding situation. If the allegations being made by former staff are accurate, Harry was presumably present in the household when at least some of these incidents occurred. Did he witness the alleged behavior? Did he know about the formal complaints being filed? Did he intervene, or did he remain silent? Sources suggest that Harry's credibility is now being scrutinized alongside his wife's. In his memoir and public interviews, Harry positioned himself as someone committed to mental health awareness and workplace well-being. If he was aware of alleged bullying in his own household and did nothing, that positioning becomes extremely difficult to maintain. One royal commentator put it bluntly: Harry cannot claim ignorance and maintain credibility as someone who fights against toxic environments. Reports indicate that some former staff members feel particularly betrayed by Harry's silence over the years. These were individuals who served the prince directly, who believed in the causes he championed, who trusted that he would ultimately stand for the values he publicly espoused. Sources claim that at least one former employee expressed profound disappointment that Harry never acknowledged the treatment they allegedly experienced. Another reportedly said they expected more from someone who talked so extensively about kindness and mental health awareness. The gap between Harry's public advocacy and his alleged private inaction is, according to these sources, impossible to reconcile. The strain on the Sussex marriage from this situation reportedly extends beyond disagreements about strategy. Insiders claim that Meghan has expressed frustration that Harry is not defending her more forcefully in private conversations with former staff and royal contacts. Harry, meanwhile, allegedly feels conflicted about dismissing the accounts of people he once worked alongside and respected. One source described recent interactions between the couple as icy and transactional, with communication reduced to essential logistics rather than emotional support. Whether this tension represents a temporary response to crisis or something more fundamental remains unclear, but sources uniformly agree that the marriage is being tested in ways it has not experienced since the couple left royal duties. The situation has also reportedly affected Harry's relationship with whatever allies remain in the UK. Sources suggest that his attempts to communicate with former staff members have not been well received, with some viewing his outreach as an attempt to gather intelligence for Meghan's legal team, rather than genuine concern. Others allegedly questioned why Harry is only now reaching out years after they left the household and filed their complaints. One former employee reportedly responded to Harry's contact by saying it was too little, too late. The bridge burning that accompanied the Sussex departure from royal life has left Harry with few people willing to vouch for his good faith. And in this particular crisis, good faith may be exactly what he needs. But while Harry and Meghan grapple with their internal response, the palace is watching this situation unfold with a reaction that speaks volumes about how the institution now views its former members. Royal insiders say the palace is engaging in a strategy of calculated silence that represents perhaps the most devastating response possible. There are no statements of support being drafted. There are no behind-the-scenes conversations aimed at calming the situation. There is no institutional effort to protect Meghan from the coming storm. Instead, sources claim that senior palace officials are simply watching, allowing the story to develop without interference, and privately viewing the entire situation situation as a form of cosmic justice. One insider described the atmosphere in royal circles as something approaching satisfaction. Another used a more pointed term, karma. This approach represents a striking departure from traditional palace crisis management. Historically, the institution has extended some degree of protection even to members who have departed on difficult terms. The philosophy of never complain, never explain typically applies to criticisms of family members as well as to the institution itself. But sources indicate that the treatment Harry and Meghan have directed toward the royal family in recent years has fundamentally altered this calculation. The Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, the memoir, the constant stream of accusations and revelations. Palace officials have apparently concluded that extending protection to the Sussexes at this point would be both futile and undeserved. One royal source put it simply, they made their choices, and now they live with the consequences. The reaction from William and Charles reportedly goes beyond mere institutional indifference. Sources claim that both the prince and king view the emerging staff allegations as vindication for years of attacks they endured without response. When Meghan accused the institution of racism, of coldness, of deliberate cruelty, senior royals remained silent in accordance with protocol. When Harry published detailed criticisms of his brother and father, they did not respond publicly. Now, with the people who actually worked alongside Meghan preparing to offer their own accounts, sources say there is a sense that the record is finally being corrected. One insider close to the Prince of Wales described his reaction as something between relief and grim satisfaction, not because he wishes ill on anyone, but because the truth allegedly aligns with what the family has always believed. The unreleased bullying report has become a focal point of renewed discussion within palace walls. Sources indicate that there is active debate about whether the mounting public pressure should finally result in the report's publication. Some officials allegedly argue that releasing the findings would provide definitive institutional support for the staff members now speaking out. Others caution that publishing an internal investigation could set dangerous precedents and expose the palace to its own legal vulnerabilities. The decision apparently rests with senior advisors to the king who are weighing the benefits of transparency against the risks of engaging directly in the Sussex controversy. One thing seems certain, if former staff continue coming forward with corroborating testimony, the pressure to release that report will become increasingly difficult to resist. What makes the palace silence so devastating for Meghan is what it communicates without saying anything at all. When the institution defended family members in the past, it signaled that those individuals remained valued parts of the royal structure. When it chose not to respond to external attacks, it demonstrated confidence that the truth would eventually emerge. Now, facing allegations from people who worked inside royal walls, Meghan has no institutional protection whatsoever. She is on her own, fighting a battle against former employees while the palace simply observes. One commentator described it as watching someone drown while the lifeguard reads a magazine. Whether that characterization is fair depends entirely on your view of what Meghan deserves, but the strategic calculation is undeniable. The palace has decided that this is not their problem to solve. But the consequences Meghan faces extend far beyond reputational damage within royal circles, and the potential legal and financial fallout could be genuinely catastrophic. Legal experts who have examined the situation suggest that Meghan could face serious challenges if staff testimony becomes formalized through legal channels or official proceedings. The documentation that former employees allegedly possess could serve as the foundation for civil complaints, employment tribunal cases, or even referrals to professional regulatory bodies. One attorney specializing in workplace disputes noted that coordinated testimony from multiple witnesses, supported by contemporaneous evidence, represents the strongest possible foundation for legal action. Another suggested that if even a portion of the alleged behavior is proven, Meghan could face liability extending well beyond reputational harm. We are talking about potential financial judgments that could run into millions of dollars. The business implications of these revelations may prove equally damaging. Sources indicate that brand partners and media executives are watching this situation with intense concern. Netflix, which signed the Sussexes to a reported $100 million deal, has already seen diminishing returns on that investment following the cancellation of several promised projects. If staff allegations gain further traction, sources suggest the streaming giant may finally conclude that the Sussex partnership has become more liability than asset. One entertainment industry insider described conversations happening at senior levels about whether any future Sussex content is worth the reputational risk now attached to the couple. The answer, apparently, is increasingly uncertain. Sponsors and commercial partners beyond Netflix are reportedly conducting their own assessments. Meghan's solo ventures, including her American Riviera Orchard brand and podcast efforts, depend on her maintaining a positive public image. Corporate sponsors evaluate not just current reputation but trajectory, asking whether association with a particular figure is likely to be become more or less risky over time. Sources indicate that at least 2 potential partnerships were quietly shelved in recent weeks as the staff allegations began circulating in media circles. Another deal, reportedly near completion, has allegedly been placed on indefinite hold pending resolution of the situation. The financial pipeline that sustains the Sussex lifestyle may be developing serious leaks. The possibility of civil action by former employees represents perhaps the most direct financial threat. Sources suggest that legal representatives for some staff members are exploring options for formal complaints or lawsuits. The specific claims being considered reportedly include intentional infliction of emotional distress, hostile work environment, and potentially breach of implied employment contracts. One legal analyst noted that UK employment protections are particularly robust, making employer liability for workplace mistreatment relatively easy to establish. If multiple former employees pursue coordinated legal action, the costs of defense alone could prove staggering, regardless of ultimate outcomes. And if judgments go against Meghan, we could be looking at damages and legal fees totaling tens of millions of dollars. Beyond immediate legal and financial consequences, these revelations threaten to undermine the very foundation of Meghan's post-royal brand. She has positioned herself as someone who speaks truth to power, who stands up against institutional bullying, who advocates for the voiceless and mistreated. If credible allegations emerge that she herself was allegedly the bully, the fundamental contradiction destroys her carefully constructed narrative. One public relations expert described it as a brand extinction event. Another suggested that no amount of crisis management could fully repair the damage if staff accounts are widely believed. Meghan built her image on being the victim. She cannot simultaneously be the villain. Yet that is precisely the position these allegations threaten to create. But what happens next in this unfolding saga could define not just Meghan's reputation but her entire legacy, and the options before her are all deeply problematic. The path forward for Meghan Markle contains no easy choices, only variations of difficulty. She stands at a crossroads where every direction leads through territory that threatens something essential to her carefully constructed identity. Sources close to the situation suggest she is weighing multiple response strategies, each carrying significant risks. The aggressive legal approach, pursuing cease and desist orders and potential lawsuits against former employees, could create a David versus Goliath narrative where wealthy ex-royalty attempts to silence ordinary working people. The accommodating approach, acknowledging past mistakes and seeking reconciliation, would require admitting behavior that directly contradicts years of self-presentation. And the silent approach, hoping the story fades without engagement, seems increasingly impossible given the coordinated nature of the allegations. The staff members preparing to speak have, in a sense, seized the narrative initiative. They chose the timing. They chose to coordinate. They allegedly chose to document incidents as they occurred, demonstrating premeditation that suggests confidence in their accounts. Meghan is now responding to a situation designed by others, which represents a significant departure from her usual media strategy. Throughout her public life, she has generally controlled the terms of engagement, choosing when to speak, to whom, and about what subjects. That control has evaporated. Former employees are allegedly setting the agenda, and Meghan must react rather than lead. For someone who has built her brand on empowerment and agency, this loss of control must be particularly galling. The question of public perception will ultimately determine how this situation resolves. If the majority of observers believe the staff accounts, Meghan's carefully constructed image suffers potentially irreparable damage. If the public dismisses the allegations as a coordinated attack by hostile actors, she may emerge with her brand intact or even strengthened. At the moment, polling and social media sentiment appear mixed, with loyal supporters dismissing the claims while critics treat them as confirmation of long-held suspicions. The battle for the middle ground, those who have not formed strong opinions about Meghan, will likely determine the ultimate outcome, and that battle is being waged through every article, every interview, every carefully placed leak from both sides. One factor that may prove decisive is the sheer number of former employees reportedly prepared to speak. A single disgruntled staff member can be dismissed as an outlier with personal grievances. Two might be coincidence, but 4 or more individuals from different roles and time periods, all describing consistent patterns of behavior, presents a much more difficult challenge. Sources indicate that additional former employees beyond the initial 4 may be considering coming forward as well, potentially creating a cascade effect that becomes impossible to characterize as coordinated fabrication. One crisis management expert noted that in situations like this, there is often a tipping point where staying silent becomes riskier than speaking. Once that threshold is crossed, the floodgates can open rapidly. The historical comparison that keeps emerging in commentary about this situation is instructive and alarming for Meghan. Powerful figures who faced coordinated allegations from former employees have rarely emerged with their reputations intact. The pattern typically involves initial denials, followed by additional accusers, followed by evidence that corroborates claims, followed by eventual acknowledgement of at least some problematic behavior. Whether Meghan's situation follows this trajectory remains to be seen, but the parallels are close enough to cause serious concern for anyone invested in her public image. The staff allegedly kept receipts. The staff allegedly coordinated their accounts. The staff are allegedly prepared to speak on record. Each of these elements represents an escalation beyond typical disgruntled employee situations. The irony of Meghan's current predicament is almost too perfect to ignore, and it contains lessons about hubris that extend far beyond this particular situation. Meghan Markle now faces perhaps the greatest threat to her public image from the very people who knew her best during her time inside the royal machine. Not from tabloid journalists operating at a distance, not from royal courtiers protecting institutional interests, not from family members engaged in dynastic competition, but from personal assistants, scheduling coordinators, and palace liaisons who worked alongside her daily, who witnessed private moments that cameras never captured, who allegedly documented incidents they found deeply troubling. These are people who entered her service hoping to help facilitate a new chapter in royal history, and allegedly left questioning whether any job was worth what they experienced. Their collective decision to speak represents a reckoning that Meghan apparently never anticipated. The irony coursing through this entire situation is absolutely staggering. Here is a woman who has spent years accusing the palace of silencing her, of suppressing her voice, of preventing her from telling her truth. She gave interviews specifically to share her perspective after allegedly being muzzled by institutional handlers. She produced documentaries designed to show the world what really happened behind palace walls. She supported a memoir that revealed private conversations and personal grievances without restriction. Throughout this campaign, she positioned herself as someone fighting against powerful forces that wanted to keep the truth hidden. And now she is allegedly attempting to silence the people who worked for her, deploying legal threats and crisis management strategies to prevent them from telling their truth. Allow me to translate. The victim has allegedly become exactly what she claimed to oppose. The question that observers and historians will ultimately grapple with is whether the public will believe palace staff over a duchess, or whether they will dismiss these revelations as just another chapter in the endless Sussex wars. That determination will depend partly on the specific evidence produced, partly on the credibility of individual accusers, and partly on pre-existing sympathies that color how people interpret new information. Meghan's supporters will likely view the allegations as a coordinated smear campaign designed to punish her for challenging the institution. Her critics will see confirmation of behavior patterns they have suspected for years. The truly undecided, those who have not invested emotionally in either side, may ultimately determine whether these revelations produce lasting damage or fade into the noise of perpetual Sussex controversy. What seems certain is that this moment represents a fundamental test of the narrative Meghan has constructed. She cannot be both the heroic truth-teller fighting against silencing and the powerful figure attempting to silence others. She cannot be both the victim of workplace bullying and allegedly the perpetrator of it. She cannot demand that her accounts be believed while dismissing the coordinated accounts of multiple former employees. The contradictions are irreconcilable. Something has to give. Either the staff allegations are fundamentally false and represent a remarkable instance of coordinated perjury, or the image Meghan has presented to the world contains significant distortions. There is no middle ground that allows both narratives to coexist. Do you think these staff revelations will finally expose the truth about what happened inside the Sussex household, or is this just another chapter in the endless back and forth that has defined the post-royal era? Are we witnessing the beginning of a genuine reckoning, or will this story fade like so many Sussex controversies before it? The former employees have made their move. Meghan is scrambling to respond. The palace is watching in silence, and the public is left to sort through competing claims from people who each insist they are telling the truth. Drop your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video is waiting, and you will not believe what is coming next.